So now that we have our matte painting and the CG that are sitting pretty well in the shots, now that we have all our projection setups that are ready, we can start to do a bit of compositing, so adding life. There's a whole lot of stuff you can do inside of Nuke, so obviously I will not be able to cover everything. I'm just gonna cover like a few basic things, a few little tricks that I use, and once again, just because I do something one way doesn't mean it is the only way. So the first thing I'm doing here is separating actually my sky into another scene node. And that is gonna allow me to do a few stuff, like for example, light traps, etc. So, and it's just, I mean, most of the time I like to have the sky in a separate scene. Sometimes also different elements in the scene. I might have a few mountains in one scene node, a few others in another scene node. So I'm just keeping everything quite readable and organized here. So now I have the sky in another scene node. One thing I can start doing is use a grid wrap to start very subtly animating those clouds. Because if you take a look outside, clouds are moving fast or slowly depending on the wind. But in this case, I have this very dramatic kind of lighting. It's very fantasy, a bit dark type of shot. So I surely want to have some movement in those clouds. So I'm using those grid wrap nodes to do this, and you can add a bunch of those. So what I'm doing is first determine where I want this grid. Then all you have to do is to set a keyframe at the first frame, then set another keyframe at the last frame of the shot, and you just move the dots around where you want them to be at the end of the shot. Now, one thing I would say though is that using this node can make the render quite slow. It does make the whole script a lot heavier, so just be aware of that. So I'm gonna use maybe one or two different grid wraps. Usually I start by one that covers the whole sky, and I use this one for like the general direction for like the big chunks of clouds. Then I might use up to 2, 3, 4, 5 sometimes smaller grid wraps that would cover more smaller movements, like maybe clouds running on themselves and stuff like that. Stuff for maybe clouds that are closer to the foreground. So I can add a second one here. I don't think I will use more than 2 or 3 for this shot. And as you can see, I'm gonna cover a smaller surface here of the clouds. So I'm gonna draw the zone where I want the coverage to be of this grid wrap, and I put a keyframe at the first frame, and then I go to the last frame of the shot and I move the dots around, and that will actually automatically create a new keyframe. Now, since the shot is quite long, I'm not quite afraid of doing like quite a large movement. So I'm sure we can actually see the clouds moving. It's kind of tricky sometimes, because sometimes it might look good, sometimes it just gives this weird parallax effect. So it also depends on the camera move. It might not always look good, so there's definitely a bit of trial and error here. It usually takes quite a while for me to do like a really convincing type of cloud movement. Okay, I think it's not too bad. So it's a subtle movement, but it might work. I'm just wondering at this point if I will maybe invert the direction of the movement or not. I'm not quite sure yet. I will keep going with this direction for the moment. I'm gonna tweak those grid wrap a little bit because I just want the movement to be a bit more visible, so it's a bit more dramatic. Because I imagine this day to be not exactly a calm day, more the type of like stormy, I guess. So definitely those clouds, I want those clouds to move just a bit faster. And also, I mean, it's obvious, but you want to pay attention to the fact that the clouds that are closer to you will obviously move faster than the ones in the background. So pay attention to that, otherwise it will just not look natural at all. Okay, so I think now they're moving fast enough, probably. And don't hesitate to play the shot many times to get used to it, to see if it really feels natural or not. I also sometimes play it in reverse. It also helps to see many mistakes. It's a bit like, you know, flipping the canvas in Photoshop. It just helps seeing the mistakes. Okay, so I'm gonna add, I think, a third grid wrap for like really smaller cloud movements, really for the details. So like I have like my first grid wrap that is really for the big clouds, the general movement of the sky. Then I have a medium one, and now I have 1 or maybe 2 smaller grid wraps for really like, you know, the clouds running on themselves and stuff like that. Usually more for the clouds that are more in the foreground, I guess. And I think that after this, I will actually probably add layers of clouds to have some that are a bit closer to the camera. And by the way, make sure also that the geometry onto which you are projecting the sky is three-dimensional enough, I guess, so that it's not like a flat card. You really do want to sell the illusion of depth.